Even though I know this video is going to be obsolete very quickly, I actually decided that I wanted to do a video where I kind of ranked all of the MCU movies. I've been watching a lot of videos lately that are like ridiculously long about, ranking different things, whether it be Disney movies or shows and stuff like that. And I wanted to make one of these, but actually I bit off way more than I could chew at first and attempted to do a video over ranking all of the Disney songs, and I very quickly realized that was way too big. So instead I'm going to stick to something a little easier, and actually in this video I'm going to be ranking every single Marvel movie in the MCU. So let's just go ahead and get right into this. Also, these are all my opinions, so don't hate me if you disagree with any of them. Also, this feels pretty obvious, but spoilers. Up in the 27th spot is Thor 2. Now, a lot of people have problems with Thor 2, and I do as well. Mostly just that the film is very forgettable. Especially because later on in Endgame, it becomes so important that you've seen this film and that you know what's going on. But I think there is one moment that's a standout moment that I really do like in this film, and that's when Loki transforms himself into Steve Rogers for a scene. Whenever thinking about Thor 2, that's always the scene that comes to mind. But other than that, very forgettable film. Not necessarily a bad film. I don't think any of the MCU films are bad. I think some of them have more problems than others. And the biggest problem, like I said, with Thor 2 is just very forgettable. I actually feel really bad putting this film so low on the list because it's one that I was really excited for. It came out a little bit after Infinity War, and because of all the hype around Infinity War, I think me along with many others were excited. One of the biggest fears that people had is that Captain Marvel was going to come in and just kind of take over the entire MCU, and I don't think that happened. And I think there's a lot that I do like about the film. One of my only complaints is when the film came out. That's my biggest complaint. Captain Marvel should have came out earlier in the MCU, or in my opinion, it should have came out directly after Endgame. I think Captain Marvel should have started off Phase 4. But even past that, it kind of ruins chronological order because it being a prequel, but it also kind of spoils some things that we learn about later on. I like the end credit scene. I don't like when the end credit scenes in films that take place out of timeline order. I don't like when they mess up the future films. But along with that, Captain Marvel's not a bad film. Are there some problems with it? Yes, I loved all the stuff with Goose the Cat. I love the interactions between Nick Fury and Carol Danvers. So there are good things in the film, but it just didn't rank higher than any of these other ones for me. One thing that this film does right off the bat that has put it so low on the list is it's one of the films where it takes the main character and it takes everything that makes that character cool and rips it away from them. There's a few films in the MCU that does this, but I think none of them do it quite as bad as Thor. But it's not a bad film. Loki is really cool, setting him up, as well as just all the setup for the Avengers. Like the Hawkeye cameo is really interesting. But with that being said, it is as low as it is because it's a film that takes Thor and takes him out of Asgard and all the cool things that come with Thor and just drops him on Earth. And it's a very it feels like they were really shooting to make another Iron Man film at this point in time, which is not a bad thing to do. Iron Man's a great film, but Thor as a character should have had more of a Thor Ragnarok-like presence in this film, and he didn't, and that was unfortunate for me. Okay, so I feel like this one might be a little controversial. Doctor Strange is in the 24th spot for me because the character that we see in the later films like Infinity War and Endgame of Doctor Strange is such an interesting and cool character, and I feel like that really doesn't shine through in Doctor Strange. I'm very excited for Doctor Strange 2, The Multiverse of Madness. I think that's going to be a very interesting film, and I'll probably do some other video on that too if there's anything interesting enough for me to talk about. But even past that, just Doctor Strange as a film was very boring for when it takes place in the MCU. I feel like Doctor Strange was completely surrounded by way better films, and even though the characters that are set up in that film are very interesting, I don't like that it takes us 2 or 3 films to really realize how cool that they are. I just don't think their setup was all that interesting, but I am excited for the sequel, and I'm excited to get to some of the films later on this list that feature Doctor Strange in a much cooler way. I do have to point out, I'm actually filming this part later than what you just saw. I almost forgot to mention, Dormammu is the highlight of the film, and the best part of this film is that we actually get to see a final boss fight that isn't just New York City being attacked or a city being attacked. We get to see Doctor Strange fighting in a way other than using his abilities. It's more using time travel, and it was a very, very cool way to end that film. Now, I already thought that the last one was probably an unpopular opinion, but I know this one is an unpopular opinion. I think the Incredible Hulk film that came out in Phase 1 is better than every film that we've talked about so far on this list. Yes, I do feel, it feels like the weird, not part of the MCU almost because of all the recast and things that have changed since this film came out. But, Tony Stark is in the end credit scene, and General Ross has now appeared in multiple films, including Black Widow that just came out. So I do feel like this is MCU canon, and they seem to act like it is as well. Especially with the Abomination going to be in Shang-Chi, which is coming up, which is very interesting. But I like the Incredible Hulk film, and I feel like it is unfortunate that we never got a sequel for this film, because I think a lot could have came out of that would have been really good, even if they did do the recast in the sequel with, actually, especially if they did the recast. I think that would make an amazing sequel film. We could even explore a little bit more, even though I wasn't super into it. A lot of people seem to not be into it, but the romance between Natasha and Bruce Banner, we could have explored that a little bit in a sequel, even if the film ends up with them no longer being together, because that's obviously not the route that Marvel ended up taking. But I think that there's a lot of interesting things that were kind of set up with the Hulk's character throughout this film and later in the MCU that it's very unfortunate we didn't get to see more of. So, it's never too late. Maybe do a Planet Hulk movie at this point. I know they kind of did a little bit of that during Ragnarok, but it would still be cool to maybe get another movie that takes place as a prequel to Ragnarok. Okay, I know that I've said this for all of them, but I truly mean it on this one. This will by far be the most unpopular opinion on this list. But in the 22nd spot, we have Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Okay. Obviously, I need to explain myself. I can't just say something that crazy and then leave it. I'm not huge on this film. I don't like the ground level spy action in these films. As you'll see later in the list, I'm much more a fan of the cosmic and magic side of the MCU. So, a film that is mostly about Steve Rogers, Natasha, and Bucky Barnes doesn't super interest me. Now, I think that later on in some of the films, which I'll go over later, I think that they really fixed and got a lot better when it comes to their ground level action. But the Russo brothers, I feel like this was the first film that the Russo brothers helped out on, and I love Community as a show. So whenever I heard that they were going to be part of it, amazing. Very excited about that. And I feel like they ended up through Infinity War, Civil War, Endgame, did some amazing stuff. But what they did in Captain America the Winter Soldier, I wasn't huge on. I also don't like the change that it put in Captain America's character. Bucky took a few films to grow on me. At this point, after seeing Falcon and the Winter Soldier, great character. I really, really like Bucky. But whenever he was first introduced, I wasn't super excited to see his character. But he's grown on me. And like I said, this is just my opinion. Please don't end me for this. Captain America the First Avenger. I think this film is better than Captain America the Winter Soldier for a couple reasons, but the biggest reason is I just really like that. I like when an MCU movie can give us a taste of something that feels completely different than all the others. If you were to watch through in chronological order or just in release order all of the Marvel movies, this one feels so different than all the other movies on the list. And it's because it just gives this really nice 40s aesthetic. I really like the film. And I hope that we get to maybe see at some point some more films that take place around this time frame. It's never too late to go back and give us, a film based on Bucky in between the events of both this movie and The Winter Soldier. There's a lot of time in between that could focus on. Red Skull as a villain. I haven't really talked about many of the villains up until this point because many of them aren't that interesting. But Red Skull is a pretty interesting villain, and the way they set up his ending perfectly goes full circle through Infinity War whenever we see the return of Red Skull. So it's just a really good film. This film really confuses me because it feels like such a clear setup for Iron Lad as a character, but it seems to have went nowhere. I think had the MCU not gotten Spider-Man, when it got Spider-Man, I think Iron Man 3 would have been a much more important film for the MCU. As I think that kid would have been set up as Iron Lad, and I think we would have followed him in a very similar role to what we got with Spider-Man. And I could be wrong on that, but that's kind of what it feels like. But overall for this film, it would be higher on the list. The only reason why it's not any higher than where it's at is because the lack of Iron Man in the film bugs me, and I get that it's an important lesson. It sets up the lesson of if you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it. And that's an important lesson for the MCU. I think it's what, in the second half of Iron Man's character arc, that is what completely drives him. So it's something that's clearly needed to be set up. But watching an Iron Man film without the AC/DC songs, watching an Iron Man film without him having an Iron Man suit for 3/4 of the film, it's kind of boring. And it does hurt the film a little bit in the long run, and that's why it's my least favorite of the Iron Man films. The only other thing I can really say is, had you asked me about this film prior to Endgame, I would have complained because they set up Iron Patriot and do absolutely nothing with him, but he kind of returned in Endgame, I guess, so I guess that's no longer a plot hole, but it bugs me. Also, I don't love that the end of the film has him giving up all of his suits, only for the next film he appears in to be about him trying to build a suit of armor around the world, which ends in Ultron. I don't like how his character changes in between films, but other than that, that's why Iron Man 3 is where it's at. It's actually kind of interesting. We have our first Disney Plus series to make the list, and it's actually Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is really good, and if you were to ask me, out of all the Marvel projects, which one has the most interesting side characters, not the funniest or whatever, but the most interesting, I would say Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because both Falcon has a very, very interesting arc as he slowly becomes Captain America. The Winter Soldier has an interesting arc as we're seeing him go through and try to kind of check off his list and right all of his wrongs, which is such an interesting thing. And those are both very interesting plots to base a show off of. But even past that, we also have the John Walker story, which is very, very interesting, seeing him try to take on the role of Captain America and how he struggles because he wasn't necessarily prepared for this role. We get to see Isaiah Bradley's story arc, which is so interesting, and the way it all comes together and pays off in the Captain America Museum is really interesting. And even past that, we also have Zemo, which Zemo was such a uninteresting villain, and then he comes into this show and becomes one of the best characters, a standout character, even like the dancing meme of him. So overall, very, very good series. Not quite as good as the other series. I feel like had this one aired first, I would have a more positive opinion of it. But the way it aired and the way it came out, this is where I'm putting it, in 19th place. Ant-Man and the Wasp. This one was really close to actually being beat out by Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but I just put it just slightly ahead for the end credit scene alone. The end credit scene for Ant-Man and the Wasp, while yes it was pretty predictable going into the movie theater, makes this entire film go up at least one grade level. Other than that though, the villain is the only complaint I have with the film. I really like the comedy of the film with like Louise. The Ant-Man and the Wasp's characters both become very, very improved on from the original Ant-Man. Their new abilities are used really well. And because of Civil War, we've now gotten to know Ant-Man a little bit better. It's also one of the best uses of the Sokovia Accords. You'll probably see more so later in this list. I'm not a huge fan of the Sokovia Accords. I think all it does is puts the writers of these films in a box. I feel like after Endgame, there should have been like a throwaway line that, oh, because Thanos snapped, they've undone the Sokovia Accords. But as long as they're in play, this is the best film to use them, which needed to because it came out around Infinity War, and that's when the Sokovia Accords needed to be talked about. But like I said, amazing end credit scene. It's also our first appearance of Jimmy Woo, which is an amazing character who will go on to do more stuff later on. So that's why Ant-Man and the Wasp is fallen where it's fallen. Depending on when I watch this film, it completely changes whether if it's one of my absolute favorite Marvel films, or if it's one that kind of ranks where it is right here on the list. But I think 9 times out of 10, it's going to fall where it's at here. So this is where it's going to stay at the moment, but it's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It's an amazing film. But at this point, every film that's still on this list, I would consider an amazing film. So the fact that it's here in the 17th spot isn't by no means like me putting this film down. It's an amazing film. The stuff with Yondu specifically, if the Yondu plot wasn't in this film, if it only focused on the Guardians stuff with Ego, it would be way lower on this list. Ego is not that interesting of a villain. It's always been said that like Marvel has a really hard time with villains, and I do believe that for the most part that is true. But Yondu, if you consider Yondu a villain, or Nebula, both of these two characters Obviously, eventually they kind of flip sides to kind of be more Guardians themselves. But even as villains, they are some of the most interesting characters that the MCU has to offer. The music, of course, is good, but in both the Guardians movies, the soundtracks are amazing. And yeah, that's where I would put this one. Hey, it's Future Me again. I also meant to say, adding Mantis to the lineup was one of the best decisions that they made, because not only is she such a fun and interesting character, but it also made Drax 100 times funnier than he ever was in the original film. Alright, so Iron Man 2 is a film that a lot of people put really, really low on their list, but I strongly disagree. I think Iron Man 2 is significantly better than Iron Man 3, and is one of the better sequels that the MCU has had in general, especially to the original 4 characters like individual solo films. Iron Man 2 has one of the coolest villains of the MCU being Whiplash. A lot of people don't like the way they handled Whiplash, and although I don't think we did get to see him at his full potential, he's a villain I would love to see return, and put him in like the comic accurate outfit, bring him back, and I don't think anyone would be ready for how cool that film could be. Also, it expands a lot more on Tony Stark as a character in a way that the first film was afraid to. It dives into a lot of stuff from like the comics, which is way deeper into Tony Stark's character than honestly any of the other films have ever really focused on. Justin Hammer, everyone's talked about it, such a fun character. The way he is like made to be an exact foil of Tony Stark. And just in general, it's a really good film. I love the end credit scene. The setup for Black Widow, up until probably like Infinity War, maybe like I can't think, or Civil War and Infinity War, before those films, this was the best appearance of Black Widow in my opinion. And of course Nick Fury returns, Pepper Potts returns, a lot of just really fun stuff, and a really good sequel for the MCU. I feel like a lot of you are really going to want to know where I put WandaVision, and it's actually right here in the 15th spot. WandaVision is a series that's kind of all over the place for me. Depending on the episode, depends on if it's one of the best things that Marvel has ever done, or if it's something where I feel like they kind of dropped the ball. The first 2 episodes, I feel like they dropped the ball. If it hadn't been for the fact that I had been waiting years for something new with or 2 years almost at that point for something new Marvel, I would not have enjoyed WandaVision. But whenever we get to episodes 3 and 4, and they start setting up stuff like Evan Peters' Quicksilver, I started getting really invested. But then they kind of did the Iron Man 3 thing where I was excited for Evan Peters, and he was no more than a joke, and he was not the X-Men Fox Quicksilver version. And that's fine, they didn't have to go that route, but I really wish they wouldn't have put so much time focusing on him. But of course, the best thing to come out of WandaVision is Agatha, such an interesting character, and I really hope she returns. And yeah, and also I love all the songs in the series. I really like villain songs in any form of media, so the fact that Agatha All Along is even a song, it really made that episode one of the strongest for me. And yeah, I wish the finale would have been a little bit better though. And yeah, so that's where WandaVision's at. At the time of recording this, the finale has not aired. So if the finale is really bad, I'll probably cut in right after like this segment and explain why I was wrong. But if the finale is just what I expect, which is going to be like Loki variant is in charge of TVA, if something else really significant happens, then I'll add on and talk about it. But Loki is in the 14th spot. The best of the series so far, for sure. The Sylvie's character, one of the best characters in the series. Mobius, one of the best characters in the series. Loki, the main variant, is such a good character. And I don't know what else to say other than, if there was one of these, like, out of the 3 series so far, if there was one where I can say that every character in the series was just so funny, like, Loki could just be a straight up comedy. But it really sets up the whole multiverse and the TVA idea really well. And just overall, a really, really funny series. And I don't know if it's supposed to be that funny, but I legitimately find the Loki series to be one of the funniest things in the MCU up until this point. So that's why it ranked up so high. You might disagree with that. I know a lot of people would say WandaVision is better, but Loki just made me a little... All the way through, I was finding Loki to be the same style and very funny, and I was enjoying it. Meanwhile, WandaVision didn't really do that for me. Alright, we've actually made it to the first Avengers movie on this list, Age of Ultron. Age of Ultron, a lot of people will claim, is by far one of the, or is the worst of the four Avengers films. And while yes, I do think it's the worst, I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people will make it out to be. I really like Ultron as a villain. I know people don't like that Ultron, they kind of changed his personality to base it more off of Tony Stark, and I get that, but I'm not huge on that. The only big problem that I have with Avengers Age of Ultron is I don't like that the solution to the problem is exactly what they did to get into the problem in the first place. Honestly, that's my only problem. I love the new characters. Quicksilver is very interesting. Scarlet Witch, also very interesting, even though at the time they couldn't even call them by those names. But they were both very interesting new characters. Vision is the only one. Whenever they first introduced Vision, wasn't huge on him. Like I've already said in this segment, I don't like that Vision's being created was solely a way, like he was created the exact same way that they created Ultron. I don't like that. I feel like it should have created problems. But other than that, it was just cool to see all the Avengers come back together again. It was cool to see some more story for Hawkeye. It almost, like, what we got in that scene is what I imagine we would have gotten had there been a Hawkeye film. But other than that, Age of Ultron's really interesting. It sets up Ragnarok, which is an amazing film that I can't wait to talk about on this list. So that's where Age of Ultron goes out. The use of color in this film is by far the best in the MCU. The closest second place I would say is the Loki series. I love the way that Black Panther took the character of T'Challa from Civil War, which is already a huge standout, amazing character in Captain America Civil War. You take that and you turn it up to 100. He's such an interesting character. All of the world building for Wakanda is almost, actually I can almost say without a doubt, especially at the time that Black Panther came out, was completely unmatched. None of the other Marvel films, even Asgard, which had now been shown in 2 films, was nowhere near as interesting as Wakanda was. And that's why I think Wakanda worked so well as the location for the final battle in Infinity War. The only problem I have with Black Panther is I don't love the CGI on the final fight scene. And there's some parts that are a little too slow for my personal liking. But with that being said, it's an amazing film. And if by some crazy chance you have not seen this film yet, which this goes for every film on this list, make sure that you check it out. Whether if it's on Disney Plus or however you check it out, make sure you do, because Black Panther is by far one of the greatest that the MCU has to offer. If it hasn't become clear yet, I really like the funny MCU movies, so that's why Ant-Man is so high on the list. Ant-Man is one that shocked a lot, or it shocked me personally, with how underrated it truly is. People, for whatever reason, love to hate on Ant-Man, but the original Ant-Man film is one of the funniest films in the MCU. And if you don't believe me, or if you're having a hard time, you're watching this and you've seen all these movies and you don't understand why Ant-Man is so high, go and rewatch Ant-Man, because it is a hilarious film. And Paul Rudd does a great job as Ant-Man, which was kind of a shock to me. And it's one of those films where you watch it the first time, what it has kind of almost like what I was saying about Doctor Strange. You watch it the first time and you're like, oh, it doesn't connect to anything all that strong. There's not a lot of interesting stuff. This feels like one I could skip. But then you go back and rewatch it later on and you realize how crucial it truly is to the later films. Hey, it's Future Me again. I can't believe I didn't bring this up, but Louise is also the best part of this entire film. Okay, it's kind of crazy that we've been going for this long, but we're actually in the top 10 now. So all of the films up until this point I would super recommend, but these are my personal favorites, if that wasn't clear enough. But in the number 10 slot, we actually have Black Widow, which I feel like I need to kind of give a spoiler warning, kind of like I did for Loki, because this is a new film. Black Widow, I had almost no expectations going in, but it is one of the best films that the MCU has brought up. It is not very funny. It's weird because the very reasons that I don't really like the Winter Soldier film are some of the reasons why I really like Black Widow. And I don't know how that works, but Black Widow isn't focused on being super funny. It's more focused on the action. But the characters that it introduces, all of the new characters, are really, really cool. And I've already seen it a few times in theaters, and I can't wait to rewatch it again when it comes on Disney Plus and just really pay attention to each individual detail. Such a good film. Scarlett Johansson does amazing. The end credit scene is really cool, and setting up whether if it's the Dark Avengers or the Thunderbolts or whatever's being set up is really interesting too. And it even connects it to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which is another thing that I ranked fairly high up. So I'm very, very excited to see more from all of the new characters set up in this film. Okay, so we're at another controversial one. But I think that Avengers Endgame is only the 9th best Marvel movie. Okay, so I really like Avengers Endgame. And I feel like whenever this movie was coming out, a bunch of the marketing and a bunch of reviewers were saying that this is not just a film, this is an event. And I believe that. I truly do believe that that is how I would describe this movie. But when they're saying it's an event and then putting it in their #1 slot, I'm saying it's an event and saying it is something that you are watching because you watched Infinity War. Infinity War is the big, amazing film. And then Avengers Endgame is what follows it up. Now, there are amazing moments in Avengers Endgame. The hammer scene, or Mjolnir being lifted by Captain America, is one of the coolest moments in the MCU. The entire final battle, the Avengers Assemble moment, the Iron Man snapping, all of that, amazing. The time travel stuff, not quite as good as the final act of the film. Very good, and a very good setup for it. The first half of the film, everything prior to the time travel, should have been a Disney Plus series that aired for that whole year in between. Now, the snap is one of the most interesting things about the MCU, in my opinion. All the characters being dusted, one of the most interesting things, and I could watch it for hours. But in your big final event movie, I don't like that so much of it is dedicated to our heroes moping around sad. Now, don't get me wrong, we needed that in the film, but we needed a lot less of it. The film needed like 30 minutes of the sadness completely cut out. But even past that, this is not me hating on Endgame. Like I said, amazing film, love 3/4 of it, but it does feel like an event. So if you don't have a year-long gap in between watching Infinity War and Endgame, then the first half of Endgame loses a lot of its momentum. But with that being said, it's still one of the ones I've ranked a lot higher, and I can't wait to rewatch. I've already seen it probably 30 times, and it's only been out for like 2 years. Alright, so Thor Ragnarok is easily the best Thor film. It's also the best appearance of Loki, other than maybe the Loki series. It's the best of Thor's character. It introduces Korg, it introduces Valkyrie, both interesting characters that bring a lot to the MCU. And the story is just really, really interesting. I love the stuff on Sakaar. Probably the best of the film is whenever they're on Sakaar. But even past that, also having the Hulk, the closest we've gotten to a Hulk sequel is Thor Ragnarok. And I love the fact that the film, the way it ties to Infinity War. I love the fact that the end of this film ends on a very happy moment in the audience's eye, only for a year or two later, when Infinity War comes out, for that same moment to have such a different feeling. I love it when one of the later films can make you go back to one of the older films and feel something completely different than you did the original time. And that's the way I feel whenever I go back and rewatch Thor Ragnarok. Because that final moment, that's supposed to be such a happy moment, it feels almost a little sad at this point, knowing what happens next. Of course, the stuff with the Tesseract is cool. I don't like the fact that this film gets rid of Mjolnir. I feel like there was better ways to have done that. I feel like almost Hela could have just taken Mjolnir and she used it throughout the film, and it would have been just as impactful. Don't get me wrong, I get that they wanted to set up Stormbreaker, but I feel like the haircut was enough of a change for Thor's character for this film, as well as the eye patch, to where we really didn't need to set up him losing Mjolnir. And because that takes a lot away from Thor's character that I feel like the haircut and the eye patch doesn't. Not saying that he needs the hammer to be Thor, but it does really make him stand out different from the other Avengers when he has the hammer. Number 7 is Spider-Man Far From Home, almost exclusively because of how good of a villain Mysterio is. Now, I know a lot of people have very strong opinions about the different Spider-Man actors, but I personally like Tom Holland a lot, and I really like his version of the character and how he interacts with Iron Man. And again, I know that's a very unpopular opinion, but I also like the fact that Mysterio as a villain is so perfectly set up, because his motive is that more than anything else, Mysterio wants to become the next Iron Man. And Spider-Man wants more than anything else to just be a normal kid who's doing his normal everyday thing, and it is completely flipped to where he is almost being forced to become the new Iron Man. And I like that kind of difference in the characters and showing how the the responsibility of Spider-Man it has been placed upon him, even though he doesn't really want it. It's a new take for the character that I like. I feel like Mysterio. Oh, the end credit scene, by the way. Before I even get into that, the end credit scene was amazing in this film. One of the best MCU end credit scenes, along with the one from Ant-Man and the Wasp. But I feel like Mysterio was clearly his plan was to set up the Sinister Six, and something behind the scenes has happened. If all these rumors about Spider-Man 3 are true, which I hope some of them are, I hope some of the other ones aren't true. I won't get into which is which, but I feel like they were clearly setting up for Mysterio to set up the Sinister Six, and now whatever is going on in Spider-Man 3 is what happened behind the scenes. Probably whenever Sony or the deal fell through a few years ago. Clearly that affected where the story was going. But either way, all the behind the scenes stuff out of the way, Spider-Man Far From Home is a really good film, one of the best the MCU has to offer. Yeah, it's the film that started it all. It's Iron Man. It's really cool. There's not a lot that I can say about this film that hasn't already been said. It's just really interesting, the way it sets up new characters, the way that Coulson is introduced, the way that Tony Stark is introduced. I don't love that they recast War Machine. I do like the new actor who plays War Machine better, but I don't like these little plot holes. They really take me out of the universe of the MCU. But of course, the Nick Fury cameo at the end in the end credit scene was game-changing. The entire film was a game-changing film in the way that it kind of started off the entire MCU. Don't love the villain, but he was the first villain, so it kind of makes sense if you're looking at it as he's one of the earliest villains in the MCU timeline. I know there's villains that came before him, but he is one of the earliest villains, so it kind of makes sense where he's at. The soundtrack for this film, similar to the Guardians films, are amazing, and easily the best of the three Iron Man films. That was its peak. Similarly to how game-changing Iron Man was, the film I have in the number 5 slot is also very game-changing, and it is the Avengers. It's the first time that we had seen this cinematic universe all come together. It really gave more of a character to both Hawkeye and Natasha, which is really good, and it really cemented them as main Avengers, which a lot of people I feel didn't really see them as, at least in the films prior to that, as both of them were almost more of cameos in the other films. The Hulk is recast as Mark Ruffalo, which is an amazing decision, because Mark Ruffalo is by far the best Hulk actor that we've had up until this point. Seeing Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man return was really cool, because Iron Man is by far, in the early MCU, my personal favorite of the original 6. And then of course Captain America. I feel like Captain America is actually one of, if not his best appearance, was in the original Avengers, up until probably Endgame. I feel like Endgame is whenever it took them a while to get Captain America right. I feel like the first Avengers, we got a little glimpse at what he could be, and then Endgame is where we got the perfect version of Captain America. But either way, the original Avengers is a really, really good film. Loki returning as a villain was also a really smart move. And the end credit scene setting up Thanos, which would build to some really good later films. So overall, it's a really, really good film. And that's all I got. I don't know how else I can praise this film. I feel like everyone has at this point. Okay, Guardians of the Galaxy is really cool. I feel like no one expected it to be as cool as it was. The soundtrack is very amazing, and obviously at this point to the list, it's kind of becoming a little harder to talk about why I like it so much. The main villain being Ronan. Although it wasn't a super interesting villain, I did like to see that it ended in the big dance battle to save the universe. It sets up Star-Lord being the son of Ego really well. The Howard the Duck cameo in the end credit scene is also just a really funny, reference to Howard the Duck as a character. I really hope that in the third Guardians film we actually get to see more of him. The standouts of the group in this film are Rocket and Groot. Meanwhile, in the second film, I feel like the standouts are more Drax and Nebula. Or not Nebula, but Nebula is also a standout. But Drax and Mantis are both really strong standouts in the second film, where this film, Rocket and Groot are by far the best. The moment with Groot at the end of the film is one of the most emotional moments in the MCU, which is so funny because it literally is just 3 words being spoken. Also, the fact that they got Vin Diesel to play Groot is one of those things where it's very weird, but it's one of the funniest things in the entire film. Looking back, even though it's not even really a joke, but it works out so well. Yeah, I feel like this one's a little controversial. But Spider-Man Homecoming is in the third place spot. Now, when first watching this film, I knew that this was so different than anything that the MCU had done prior. The Spider-Man films are by far the easiest little, like, almost feel like side adventures to the main MCU team-ups, but that's what I want out of a character like Spider-Man. Spider-Man is supposed to be a kid in a world with all of these other superheroes, and I feel like the only way that you can do that well is in a film like this one. The way you have him, almost the main struggle for his character in this first film is he is trying to decide if he wants to go all in and become an Avenger and team up with Iron Man and do all these crazy things, or if he wants to stay where he's already at, which is just helping out the little guy. And that's what this film's big problem is. And that's why the Vulture is such a good villain in this film, and in general. The Vulture reveal that he is Liz's dad is one of the greatest moments in the MCU, because it just makes you feel this dread that I don't feel like many people saw coming. Along with that, though, the Vulture's, his technology is really cool. I like that the Tinkerer is kind of set up. Donald Glover being in the film, like I said, I'm a fan of Community, so having him there was really, really cool. And it just is a really, really good, not really origin story, but a really good, like, solo first outing for Spider-Man. And in second place, we have Captain America Civil War. Like I said, I like Captain America, but I'm not a huge Captain America guy. I was always more Team Iron Man. But Civil War perfectly improved on Winter Soldier in every way. Winter Soldier, as a film, was really setting up these action shots that, while yes, they were cool, the lack of powers made it feel like something that didn't really belong in the MCU to me. Civil War took that exact fighting style and added a little bit of different unique powers, adding characters like Ant-Man and Iron Man into the mix. And it worked out so perfect. It also sets up Spider-Man for the first time, and the scene between Tony Stark and Spider-Man is one of the best scenes in the MCU. Also, Black Panther is in this film for the first time, and it is by far the best appearance of Black Panther. The way that they had his character set up, he is such a cool character, and by the by far, I'm almost speechless talking about this film, because it is one of the best superhero films in general that I have ever seen. The fights are really cool. The new characters introduced are really cool. Zemo as a villain, it's one of those things to where you watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier and you immediately have to come back to this film to see more of Zemo and his plan working out well. And the twist at the end with Bucky being the one who killed Tony Stark's parents is another one of those moments where you will feel dread like no other. I think there's only like one moment in the entire MCU that dread is more relevant than this one, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes, but Civil War is in the number 2 slot. Alright, and last but not least, if it wasn't obvious enough, Avengers Infinity War is the best film, in my opinion, that we have in the MCU. First of all, the pacing of this film. This is not only Marvel films, not only superhero films in general, the pacing in Avengers Infinity War is probably the best in any film that I've ever seen. From the second the film starts to the second it ends, there is no filler. Everything comes back to the main central ending moment. And speaking of the ending moment, the most dreadful scene in the entire MCU has got to be the snap. I said earlier in the video that the snap is one of the things that the MCU has introduced as an idea that is the coolest by far. It's something that whenever I'm watching any of these films going forward, it's always something in the back of my head that the characters, even the little background characters who have almost no importance to the plot, all of them had to deal with the snap, and that is a world-changing event in these films that is very, very relevant. The Iron Spider suit, super cool, probably the best suit that the MCU Spider-Man has had up until this point, in my opinion. Thor as a character is at his best in this film. Hulk, I don't love the fact that the Hulk was scared to come out in the entire film, but it does work well. Also, this film introduces probably my favorite scene in the MCU, which is the early battle in New York, where it has Doctor Strange and Wong and Tony Stark and Hulk, and then Spider-Man joins in. An amazing scene. One of the funniest Stan Lee cameos in any of the MCU is in this film. The scene with Gamora on Volmir, one of the most emotional, impactful scenes in the MCU, and just overall, I really, really like this film, and I don't think that there's any that really compares. in the entire MCU. Alright, so this is one of the longest videos that I've ever made for sure, but I just kind of want to make a little ending thing to this video saying I'm sorry I don't post very much anymore. I'm trying to work on some bigger projects like this. I've been making some TikToks as well, and just I've been working on some other things. I know I made that Pokemon Snap video recently. Don't even know if I'm going to keep that one up. I'm not hugely proud of it, but it was more so just I wanted to get something out. I'd like to do some like Halloween videos this year, you know, focusing on like some villains or something, and maybe review some of these Marvel movies that are coming out or some stuff on Disney Plus, because I have been watching a lot of the Disney Plus like originals. So maybe I could do some things on a few of those, you know, focus on The Mandalorian or on What If, or maybe like Monsters at Work. But whatever else, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to smack that like button, and I will see you all later. Goodbye, guys.